So it started kind of personally with my own breakup several years ago, and, going to therapy to kind of work through my issues related to that. And then as I continued in practice, I began to notice that even when women weren't coming in with the breakup being the central issue, there were always kind of like these breakup adjacent issues.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to private practice entrepreneur Dr. Joy Harden-Bradford from Atlanta, Georgia. She's a therapist, coach, and the creator of the podcast Therapy for Black Girls. She shares her journey creating her practice and her podcast, and strategies for bringing publicity to her business. Welcome, Dr. Joy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie.
Yeah, so you have a podcast, Therapy for Black Girls, that I love to listen to. I believe you have 5 episodes out. Is that right?
I just released session 6 this morning.
Okay, 6 episodes. So can you tell me a little bit about what's been most surprising about starting a podcast?
Ooh, a couple of different things. So one, I was surprised by the amount of anxiety I had about releasing it. I'm used to kind of throwing myself into new kinds of ventures and, trying things that I've not tried before. But something about the sound of my voice kind of being out there in perpetuity just felt very, very anxiety provoking. And so I found myself like constantly recording over and over again, trying to get it just right. And just finally saying, okay, you just got to put it out there. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. So I, for one, was surprised by the amount of anxiety that came up for me around releasing the podcast. And 2, just how much work it is.
Yes.
As I'm sure you know.
I have had the same experience with anxiety too. But yeah, noticing how much work it is has been surprising too. Yeah. How much work for your podcast, how much work goes into each episode?
Well, it depends. And interestingly enough, I have found that the episodes where I actually am talking with another therapist and interviewing them about a particular issue, those are typically easier for me than the solo episodes. And again, that's probably related to, my own anxiety about like wanting to have it be a very good product when I'm talking just by myself. So I'm doing like a lot of research and kind of editing for the solo episodes. So I would probably say for the solo episodes, it's about 2 to 3 hours, and then probably closer to an hour and a half for the episodes where I'm interviewing someone else.
What do you love about doing a podcast so far?
So what I have loved so far is the way that my audience has been interacting with me. So it's been really cool to see how people are sharing different clips of the podcast on social media, and sharing it with their friends and asking me questions on Facebook. It's been really inspiring for me to read messages from people, and sometimes even like private messages from people who heard the podcast talking about, their struggles with wanting to start therapy and feeling like they got some information from my podcast that helped them to take that step, are really people being able to kind of see themselves in what I'm talking about in the podcast. So I always suspected that it would really connect with people, but seeing it, kind of in real life has really been inspiring.
Was there a particular moment when you realized that you needed to start this podcast?
Well, I don't know if there was a particular moment, but I am obsessed with listening to podcasts. And so I probably listen to anywhere between 15 and 20 podcasts a week. And so, being such a consumer of podcasts, and once I saw Melvin's course for the healthcasters about, teaching people in the health professions how to do a podcast, it felt like a natural progression for me, or at least something that I wanted to try out.
Yeah, it's such a natural thing for you, just listening. I know you're saying that you end up re-recording, and of course I do that too, but it's just, you're so connected to the people you're talking to.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Annie.
And so how many weeks has it been? It's been 6 weeks?
Well, I released with 3. So I think I launched on April 20th. So I don't think it's even been a month yet.
Okay. So yeah, you're just a few weeks ahead of me. And I know by the time this comes out, we'll be in the future, but, but at this point we're just a few weeks apart. So it's really It's really fun and exciting. And like you said, anxiety provoking to be, putting yourself out there in this new big way.
Yeah. I mean, but definitely the interaction with my audience online has helped to kind of manage that anxiety a little bit for me. So that's been good.
Oh, yeah. Because then you're also not just speaking into a microphone, speaking into the void. You get to really hear your impact and have a conversation. Can you tell us how long you've been in private practice?
Let's see. So I've moved around a little bit and have always had like a part-time private practice, probably since about 2012.
And who do you tend to see in your private practice?
So my audience typically is Black women.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of my ideal client, and mostly Black women struggling with kind of recovering from a breakup or grad student stressors.
Ah, okay. What kinds of issues come up for grad students?
Ooh, so many. So there's just a lot. One of the biggest is the imposter syndrome. So kind of feeling like at any moment somebody's going to figure out that they really got into grad school by mistake and that, they don't really deserve to be there. So that's a big one that comes up. Issues related to kind of alienation from family and friends who maybe have not gone as far education-wise. So sometimes kind of like, how do you fit into the academy, but also fit in like with your family and friends back home? So that tends to come up a lot, as well as a lot of like procrastination, and, some race-related stress coming up too, just related to kind of maybe being one of few in a graduate program and what that looks like with some of the microaggressions they may be dealing with.
Yeah. And figuring out how to deal with all those microaggressions in the middle of trying to get through grad school.
Yeah, I mean, because it really is a lot. Grad school, I think, is stressful for anybody. And so when you add on top of that, people are already feeling very, like, can I cut it here? But then when you kind of have a racist environment that makes it feel like you actually don't belong here, you can imagine what that does to your self-esteem and your ability to kind of produce the level of work that you really can produce.
Yeah. And I'm just imagining if you're not being reflected by the people teaching you.
Right.
How did you choose your niche?
Well, I think it has always felt very natural to me. I have always felt that just being in community with other Black women has always felt very therapeutic just for me in general. And there to me is something powerful and intangible about the communion of Black women. And so for me, and also thinking about how few Black women there are in the helping professions, and then looking at the research about, when Black women are looking for therapists, they typically want to see someone else who looks like them. And so, there are not that many of us. And so it felt really important for me to really kind of be out there and to present myself in a way that made people feel like, okay, if I need help, with my mental health concerns, then this is somebody that I could talk with.
Mm-hmm. And you also, in working with Black women who are struggling with breakups or recent breakups, how did that end up coming into your practice? Did you just notice that that was a big issue for people, or did you feel particularly drawn to it?
Yeah. So it started kind of personally with my own breakup several years ago. And, going to therapy to kind of work through my issues related to that. And then as I continued in practice, I began to notice that even when women weren't coming in with the breakup being the central issue, there were always kind of like these breakup adjacent issues, so you could kind of point back to the breakup as like the kind of issue that kind of started a lot of different things for women in their lives. So once I realized like, hey, this is kind of a pattern that's emerging, I felt like, okay, let me kind of explore this more and really kind of target my offerings to this particular issue. And I really do think that there is some real truth to kind of your ideal client and your niche kind of being somebody who you maybe were a couple of years ago, because I think when you talk about being able to kind of speak to somebody using their language and really being able to kind of speak to their pain points, it sometimes helps when you have had, the personal experience to kind of speak from that.
Yeah. So you're just speaking really honestly and with absolutely no jargon.
Right.
Yeah. What is your business model? You offer therapy and coaching. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell me about the difference between those two different ways of working.
Yeah. So, so the coaching, and really I describe it as breakup coaching. So this is more for maybe like a very recent breakup when, you're still kind of really struggling to just function in a lot of ways. And so really needing some kind of hands-on strategies to kind of make it through the days. So really kind of working with people to kind of map out like what the first month looks like, what the second month looks like. A lot of it is also targeted around kind of breaking connection with the ex, so not taking the phone calls and not responding to text message. Social media definitely has played a huge...
Social media, oh my God.
Yeah. That's a big one. Because years ago you could just like not answer the phone call, right? But now when it's so easy to kind of follow people and, kind of just passively lurk on people's pages, it makes it so much more difficult to really kind of break that connection with an ex.
Yeah, and to stay broken, especially when you have friends in common.
Right. Yes, that definitely makes it more difficult.
So when someone comes into your practice, do you know right away whether they're going to be a coaching client or a therapy client?
Most times they approach me in that way. So they will say, I want to sign up for breakup coaching. And otherwise, and every now and then I have someone who is not sure, and then we talk a little bit and I can kind of say, okay, this may be more suitable for actual therapy. But most times clients kind of come in very clear with that's what they want.
And when it's coaching, do you do that over the phone or over video, or do you do that in person as well?
It's really sometimes a combination of all three of those things, but most of it is typically done virtually.
Yeah. So that also makes it really, I get so many questions, as a business coach about how can I bring coaching into my practice? And that's one piece of advice that I have is to make them really different, so that it's really clear, because people get so worried about coaching with their therapy license or, getting dinged for that kind of thing. And I think having, like you do, having a program that's separate and really clearly distinct is helpful that way.
Yeah, it definitely does help me to kind of maintain the boundaries. I think I'm pretty boundaried anyway, but like you mentioned, having it be, mostly virtual really helps me to kind of think like, okay, this is separate. And then when I'm in my office and you're on my couch, then, okay, this is therapy.
In your therapy practice, what's your ideal week like? How many sessions do you like to have? What's the kind of balance of work that you like to have?
Well, now with the podcast, that is adjusting some.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say I would typically like between like 12 to 15 individual clients. I've also toyed with offering groups. And sometimes, those have made and other times they haven't. So it feels like it depends on when you can kind of catch some momentum around forming groups. But typically I like to have between 12 and 15 individual clients and then have the rest of my hours devoted to kind of working on the podcast and marketing and, blog writing, all those different things.
And may I ask what you charge?
Yeah, my fee is $140.
And is that the same for coaching sessions and therapy sessions?
Yes.
I love that you're willing to answer that. Some people are, and some people get really shy about it.
Yeah, well, I had already listened to a couple of your episodes.
Oh, okay, so you knew it was coming.
I did my homework, so I was prepared.
So you might know this question's coming too. Have you ever had a low moment or a scary moment in your therapy practice on the business side?
I don't know that I would say I've had a low moment or a scary moment. Probably the scariest thing I've done business-wise was starting this podcast.
Yeah. What do you think was most scary about it?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, just kind of like it feels very comfortable for me to be talking one-on-one with clients in session, and even for them to, kind of comment on things that I've said in weeks past and, really know that it's sticking with them. And I'm also really okay with like public speaking and like speaking to groups. But something about like the audio just being out there, and that, if somebody had further questions, like would they really understand me, or would it be questionable, some of the things, and them not being able to check in with me about it. I think some of that feels very like I don't have control once it's over, once it's like out there.
Oh, totally. It's just recorded and playing in people's headphones. And
Yeah, some control stuff, with it kind of just being out there and not really knowing what's going to happen once it's out there.
Yeah, and it's very exposing. Even though I know you're really comfortable with a lot of ways of being out there, I think it's exposing, like just taking another step out. It makes me think of, Brene Brown and the work she's doing around in her book, Daring Greatly, about how there's just something very vulnerable about, stepping out further.
Yeah. And I really just have been surprised by it. So this has probably been the scariest thing. And, the fact that it is so much work without any real kind of tangible like way you can see it adding to your practice immediately. So I think it really probably will add in the long run. And I can already see, kind of like some more calls coming in and, emails and things. But in terms of tangible wise, like it is not something that pays off immediately, but still something that I think is really important to do and have out there.
Yeah. And it's helping people. That's so funny. When you were saying like there's no immediate tangible results. My son, who's 14, helps to edit my podcasts. And recently he said, "So, Mama, how many of these are you going to do? When is this going to be over?" And I was like, "Never." And he said, "That's a lot of therapists." I was like, "Yeah, there are a lot of therapists. I want to talk to a lot of them." But
yeah, I mean, you definitely won't have any lack of new guests, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, you too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's so funny how I often hear these stories about like podcasts becoming a family affair because my husband does my editing as well.
Oh, that's so great.
That definitely helps with the time piece too, to kind of be able to kind of just step away from that and give that to him.
And it's kind of fun to be in it together.
Yeah.
But they should have a support group together about helping with podcasts.
Right.
If you could time travel to, like, let's say back to 2012, around when you were going into private practice, what would you tell the Dr. Joy of that time?
Ooh, that's a good question, Annie. I think I would tell myself to kind of just trust that it will all work out. And to not be so like risk aversive, because it has been, like I mentioned, always private practice has been a part-time thing. And so for me, it took a very long time to really kind of throw myself into it fully thinking like, okay, is this really going to work? And so I think if I could time travel, I would tell myself to really just trust in the path that is before you and keep moving.
And would you even tell yourself to jump more into private practice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, because there's just so many, like now that I'm really into it, I just have so many ideas and it feels like, oh, there's just not enough time for all the ideas that I have, and so it feels like, okay, I need like all of the hours that I can to really kind of devote to the work that I feel like I need to do for my clients.
Mm-hmm. And your larger community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point, Annie, because I kind of see therapy for Black girls kind of as my practice, but also like as this much larger, almost mission, and so some of it can help my immediate clients, but I also want it to be a resource for people who are not my therapy clients and people who are other people's clients, just really wanting it to be a place where people can get good information and get the information they need to take care of themselves.
Oh, yeah. And you have a segment, no copay required.
Yes, no copay needed.
No copay needed. Yeah. Where it's very accessible. You're saying just come on in. Let's start here.
Right.
One thing that you're really awesome at with marketing is publicity. So you've been featured in Essence, for example, and it was pretty incredible. Can you tell us how that happened? How do you do that? Yeah.
So most of that has been just really organic. So I think the Essence, I think I've been in Essence a couple of times, like been quoted in Essence a couple of times. And the first time, it really started with a Twitter conversation. So somebody who I was following, I believe was an editor at Essence. We were following each other mutually, and she sent me a message saying, "Hey, I want to write this piece about Black women's mental health. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" And I was like, "Of course."
Like, are you kidding?
Right. You don't have to ask me twice. Yeah. So, I mean, so that was the first time. And then I also have used the Help a Reporter Out site. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've used that a couple of times and responded to some inquiries that have then yielded some of the stories. But most of it has really been through kind of organic social media following.
Great. So finding people who are, I mean, I know you didn't do it necessarily so strategically, but it was more like genuine interest, but finding someone who's writing about the topics that you're an expert in and following them and having an online relationship with them.
Yeah, I mean, and probably months and maybe even years before stories even come up, so you just have conversations with people authentically. And then when they are thinking about a story for a certain topic, then they think like, "Oh, I've talked to her before. Let me see if she'd be interested." So that I think would be, the biggest advice I'd give is that you want to form genuine relationships with people online so that they think about you when they're writing about your topics.
Okay, so it's kind of like using your natural social skills, but just bringing them online.
Oh, yeah.
Like if we were at a cocktail party, it's like you would know how to go up to someone and say like, "Oh, okay, like let's talk about this." But then somehow, especially for people who are new to social media, it just feels like we forget all of our person skills and just get really nervous.
Yeah, and for me, it actually feels easier on social media because it's almost set up for you to kind of just jump into conversations without really being invited. You know what I mean? So if somebody puts something out there and you make a comment about it, then you kind of just naturally start up a conversation. So when people tweet or share different articles that they've written or their thoughts about another article that has been written, it almost invites conversation in my mind. And so it feels like really easy to kind of just say, "Hey, here are my thoughts about this."
Mm-hmm. And with Help Reporter Out, or as I always call it, HARO, how do you manage that? Because, when you sign up for that, you get a lot of emails. How do you just take a look sometimes, or do you have a certain time where you look every day?
Yeah. So when I first signed up, I felt very consumed by it because it is a lot of emails. Like they come out 3 times a day and it's 75 different inquiries. So I found myself really kind of paying attention to it a lot when I first signed up. But now, I will scroll through it maybe 3 times a week, just to kind of see, because like I said, it has yielded some results for me, but not enough for me to kind of really be obsessive about it. And, you also don't ever hear back if they use your information. So, I have just kind of set up a Google alert for my name to see if I'm quoted in anything. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But it also feels like really hit or miss if you know whether they use your work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, so you might not even know that they actually used it.
Right.
Interesting. So I love that this idea, you do as much as works for you, and it's like a tool for you. It's not something that you have to be on top of all the time, 3 times a day.
Right. I mean, I think if people have if you have the budget to have a PR person and then you kind of form that out to them and it's their job to kind of scan that, kind of every time it comes out and then they get to you with any inquiries that come in, that can work best. But if you're just trying to do it yourself, I think it's a lot of energy, because I've also heard that if you don't kind of respond within the hour it comes out, then they've already gotten, 50 responses already.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you've got to run your therapy practice. So.
Right.
Yeah. How do you balance the roles of being the therapist and the CEO in your business?
I don't know that I have kind of arrived at that place yet. Because I think I identify myself so much as a therapist that the business part has kind of gradually been kind of coming into it. You know what I mean? So I definitely understand, you got to pay your taxes and, do all of this documentation stuff. Like I get that part. But the idea of like a CEO of like my own business, I think is something that has not felt supernatural to me, and so again, when we are in school for therapy, that's not something they teach us, right? Like how to actually run your own business. So that's something that I've been learning through like participating in different professional development activities, and a lot of the practice building groups on Facebook have been awesome to really help with that too. So I feel like the CEO piece is something that has kind of gradually been developing over, I would say, the last year.
Okay, because from the outside, it looks like your CEO, like if we were to kind of, split you in two, it seems like your CEO is really killing it in a lot of ways, like with being able to get this podcast going, get publicity, and have like these different kinds of offers and so much content. So I think it just kind of reminds me how, even when you're accomplishing so much, it can still feel kind of like, all right, no, there is no ideal balance. It's not like this is all figured out. It's always in process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so much of what I have put out there has really just come from the therapist piece of me. But I hear you saying that actually it may have been the CEO operating kind of undercover.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Your CEO is like tapping into what you really love doing. So great.
Yes. Yes.
Will you join me for a listener question?
Absolutely.
Listener question.
Okay, so this one came in and I want to change it a little bit. Their question was, how do you come up with things to blog about? And I want to expand it just to how do you come up with content ideas?
Yeah, so in addition to like being obsessed with podcasts, I'm also obsessed with social media. And so, I probably spend more time actually than I should. Probably need to cut that back, that the CEO needs to step in with that one. But I am always kind of staying abreast of like trending topics and like big articles like in the news. And so for me, a lot of my blog topics will come from like some new celebrity story that has kind of broken in the media, or the popular reality TV shows that people are watching, some new like scandal that's happening. I mean, so I really pay attention to what people are paying attention to on social media and typically drive my content from there.
And then like I love on your podcast even how you brought like a character from Girlfriends and from Being Mary Jane onto the couch to analyze them. Like, I think that was so brilliant. How did that occur to you?
Yeah, well, with Mary Jane, so first of all, like Mary Jane is like my ideal client in character form, and so for me, it was a no-brainer. And I had actually written a blog post similar to what I do on the podcast, probably 2 years ago now, talking about what I would do with Mary Jane if she came in as a therapy client. And so for me, it always felt like a really easy way to help people understand like what happens in therapy. So if you see some of yourself in Mary Jane and you hear me talking about what I would do with her in therapy, then it helps you to understand like, okay, well, if I went to a therapist, these may be some of the things that we could talk about. So it felt like a really natural way for me to reach my audience, knowing that so many Black women watch Being Mary Jane and, some of the other popular TV shows that have Black women characters.
That's brilliant. And it's such a great way for you to get to also really talk about how you work while maintaining confidentiality.
Right, right.
And how can people find you and throw compliments at you? What's the very best way to reach you?
Well, like I said, I'm all over social media. So my handle on Twitter is therapy4 And on Instagram and Facebook, I'm at Therapy for Black Girls.
Great. And your website?
Is therapyforblackgirls.com.
Great. And I'll have all that in the show notes. I so appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being in the clubhouse.
Absolutely, Annie. It was my pleasure.
Today's Snark Moment.
Snark Moment
is about dumpy therapist offices. I know we don't want to spend a lot of money on our offices. And I know that what's most important is the care that we're providing. But come on, have you ever been a client in a really dumpy therapy office where the couch is lumpy and what the hell is that up on the walls? And the carpet clearly hasn't been replaced in 20 years. I think having a professional therapy office that reflects a bit of your style is actually pretty healing to your clients. It's really soothing to sit in a room that clearly has been cared for. Now, I kind of learned this the hard way. My therapy office, when I first got started, was not very attractive and not even super comfortable. But in this last office that I've been in for the last 5 years, it's beautiful. And I did put a lot of work into designing it, into anticipating what it would be like for the clients. And I really have found that it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference to me when I go in and just open the door and sit down. And I know it makes a difference to clients because they've commented, and they commented when I changed over to this new office. If you can't afford to do a whole redesign, just look around your office and see what's cluttery, what's dumpy, like what is kind of the worst thing going on here, and how can I make a plan to make this better for my clients and for me. Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. I want your question for a future episode. Give us your question by emailing us at info@coachingwithannie.com. Or you can ask me a question on Instagram or Twitter using the hashtag #TherapistClubhouse. I'll find it. I love hearing your comments and questions, so keep them coming. This week, I'm talking...